Welcome everyone to another edition of the Classic Comic Archive, a series where I recap and review many of Marvel Comics' most seminal early issues. Our story for today is Avengers 5, cover dated May of 1964. The issue was written by Stan Lee, drawn by Jack Kirby, inked by Robert Bernstein, and lettered by Sam Rosen. Our issue opens up with a striking splash page, showing the Avengers as they're walking through the mansion of millionaire Tony Stark, which was damaged in a recent battle with the Hulk, as shown in Fantastic Four 26. But seeing that the battle's over, and that there's not much left for them to do, they all agree to disband, until they're needed again. So Giant Man and the Wasp head back to their laboratory, Thor returns to the medical office of his mortal identity. And Captain America and Rick Jones leave to do some acrobatic training, since Cap is prepping Rick to become his new sidekick. That just leaves Iron Man, who ostensibly works for Tony Stark, but is actually the playboy himself. So as he stays to fix the damage done to his home, let's shift forward several days, and to his main weapons factory in Long Island, New York. There we find two technicians, who are about to activate an experimental computer, meant for advanced artillery. But just before they turn it on, a strange, high-pitched noise suddenly pierces their ears. Like an earthquake, its powerful sonic vibrations shake the room, and cause the delicate computer to fall apart. While the sound eventually subsides, the technicians are left clueless as to what it was, or where it came from. So they call Tony Stark, who upon learning of what's happened, rushes out of his private apartment to assess the damage himself. In the meantime, let's shift focus to Ant-Man and the Wasp, who are conducting research deep within an anthill. They're trying to observe the actions of special isotopes, which can't be observed through any other method. But before they can find what they're looking for, the hill is suddenly rocked by the same piercing sound that shook Stark's factory. So like the factory, and especially its computer, the anthill can't handle the sound's vibrations, and thus begins to cave in on itself. Luckily though, both Ant-Man and the Wasp escape unharmed. A short time later, Thor, in his mortal guise of Dr. Don Blake, reads the day's paper, and learns of a train that recently derailed, after its engineer was startled by the mysterious sound. But this isn't the first such incident that he's heard about, as apparently the sound is randomly appearing all across the country. Fearing that something sinister's behind it, Dr. Blake decides to reassemble the Avengers. So as he transforms into Thor, and heads off to find them, let's shift focus to Captain America, who's just given an acrobatics demonstration to Rick and some of his friends. He's now going to give them some lessons in karate and judo. But they'll have to wait, as it's then that Thor arrives to take him away. But before the Thunder God can explain why they need to leave, the sound suddenly strikes again. Thus Captain America realizes the need for the Avengers, and heads off for Stark's mansion, along with Rick. So a short while later, he, Rick, and the other Avengers convene a meeting in the basement of Stark's mansion. Iron Man leads the discussion, as he reveals that, according to his tests, the sound is emanating from somewhere in the American Southwest. And although that's a big place, Giant Man immediately wonders if the Hulk's involved, as that's where he's usually stomping around. But Rick, knowing the Hulk better than anyone else, doubts this. The truth will be revealed in time, but for now, let's shift focus to an army base in the Southwest, where a strange boulder has erupted from beneath the surface, and is seemingly growing into a large hill. Stunned by this is General Thunderbolt Ross, the base's commanding officer, and the father of Betty Ross, a woman in love with Bruce Banner. Most of you probably recognize him as the scientist who, when angered, transforms into the Hulk. Bruce used to work for General Ross at the base, but with the uncontrollable nature of the Hulk, he's been gone for some time. Yet when he unexpectedly turns up, General Ross doesn't ask any questions, he simply orders him to figure out what's going on with the growing boulder. While Bruce agrees to study it, his mind is currently occupied by memories of the Hulk's origin. To briefly retell it, many months ago, while trying to save Rick Jones, Bruce was caught in the blast of an experimental gamma bomb. While it should have killed him, the blast instead transformed him into the Incredible Hulk. Over the next few months, the Hulk unfairly became known as a savage monster. He was briefly redeemed when he became a founding member of the Avengers, but by the end of their second adventure, he quit the team, and then became their enemy. But you all already know that, so let's pick up with Bruce as he's actually studying the boulder. Just from the looks of it, he can tell that it's made of a foreign substance, and looks like it's being pushed up from the ground by some mighty force. And he's right on the money with that last part, as hidden beneath Earth's surface is a secret civilization of lava men. They're lifting the boulder, which they call the living rock, up to the surface with a massive machine. It's not clear what's special about it, but apparently the living rock is very dangerous, and thus the lava men are trying to get rid of it. But one amongst them isn't so eager to dump their problem onto the surface world. His name is Molto, and he's the only one of them who's actually been there. Months ago, he'd been sent to conquer the surface, but was defeated by Thor, as seen in Journey into Mystery 97. Surprisingly though, he left the situation with a newfound respect for humanity. He knows that all told, they're not an evil people, and thus don't deserve the destruction that the living rock is going to bring. But the king of the lava men, on the advice of a warmongering witch doctor, disregards Molto's concerns, and orders his people to continue raising the living rock. Meanwhile, back on the surface, General Ross has decided to simply blow up the boulder. But just before he launches a barrage of missiles at it, the Avengers arrive in their private helicopter. General Ross is apparently a fan of theirs, as he abandons his missile plan, and allows Iron Man to investigate the rock. So the hero hovers above, and starts blasting it with a repulsor, simply to see what's beneath its outer layer. But while he's merely probing it, he's sending a volley of rubble down to the lava men. As one might expect, they mistake this for a counterattack, and thus their king orders them to invade the surface. So an army of lava men rush to escape through the hole that Iron Man's made, but before they can get there, the hero himself drops in, and momentarily blinds them with a cloud of dust. Yet he's not trying to start a fight, he's just there to talk, and to convince them to abandon their invasion. But the lava men are eager for a fight, so they ignore his calls for peace, and tackle him. With so many of them, and just one of him, Iron Man can't shake them off. So with him pinned to the ground, the lava men grab a hold of his armor, and begin transferring their internal heat into his body. Like their name would imply, they're naturally incredibly hot, and thus Iron Man starts to feel as though he's being cooked from within his armor. But then, the cave they're in is suddenly rocked by a blast of sheer power. And no, it isn't another piercing sound, which we can now assume comes from the living rock, but a blast of energy from Thor's mighty hammer, as he and Captain America have arrived to save their teammate. While Cap takes Iron Man to the surface to cool off, Thor decides to stay underground, as he's the only one who can endure its intense heat. So, still hoping to resolve the situation peacefully, he approaches a group of lava men, and demands that they take him to their leader. But they refuse to take orders from him, and attempt to trap him in a pool of lava, by melting the ground beneath him. But while Thor indeed sinks into a pool of lava, he amazingly withstands its heat, as if it's no warmer than a hot tub. Shocked and frightened by such an awesome display of power, the lava men flee in terror. So Thor goes after them, and eventually ends up in a massive chamber, where the living rock is being lifted to the surface. Overseeing its progress is the king of the lava men, who agrees to speak with Thor, and explains that the living rock is constantly growing, and emitting destructive sonic blasts. It's been plaguing his people for many years, and the only way he knows to get rid of it, is to hoist it up to the surface. Obviously not wanting that to happen, Thor offers to simply smash it with his hammer. But he can't, as the king explains that when the living rock was small, they brought it to a deserted Pacific island, and tried to smash it with one of their own mighty hammers. But when they struck it, it released a shockwave so powerful that the island itself was obliterated. Thus the king fears that any attempt to destroy it now, at its current size, would also destroy the earth. But eventually, regardless of what they do, it's going to explode on its own. So the king has decided to bring it to the surface, as although he knows it'll destroy mankind, he hopes its blast won't reach his underground society. But that's only true if he stops the Avengers from stopping him. So he quits talking to Thor, and allows his witch doctor to signal another attack. Thus a squad of lava men rush to the surface through a cave opening, and start fighting with Captain America, who's been guarding the exit. They first try to do what they did with Thor, by melting the ground beneath him. But since he's a world-class acrobat, he's able to leap away in time. Using his unbreakable shield, he's able to hold them off for a bit longer. But then, they cinderize him, which is where they heat up, and somehow solidify, the air around him. Thus he finds himself trapped within a band of unbreakable cinders. But it's then that Rick and Iron Man arrive to help. So while Rick grabs a rock and starts chipping away at the cinders, Iron Man, who's had enough time to cool off, tries to hold off the lava men. Meanwhile, back at the surface, Giant Man and the Wasp have been analyzing the living rock. They've discovered that there's one small area, which unlike the rest of the rock, isn't pulsating. Thus if a strong enough blow could strike it, the rock would be destroyed without exploding. But the only thing that can do that is Thor and his hammer. So Giant Man and the Wasp rush to go find him. But on their way underground, they run into Rick, who's still trying to free Cap, and Iron Man, who's struggling to hold off the lava men. So Giant Man rushes back to the surface, and quickly returns with their helicopter. Like a giant fan, he uses the force of its spinning blades to blow away the lava men. So now that they're gone, at least for a little while, Iron Man uses his repulsors to free Cap from the band of cinders. He then joins Cap, and the rest of his teammates, in their search for Thor. And it doesn't take them long to find him, as only moments later, they run into him, and he starts explaining how dangerous the living rock truly is. Meanwhile, back on the surface, Bruce Banner, after having spent all this time analyzing it, has also solved the mystery of the living rock. But before he can do anything about it, he suddenly, and inexplicably transforms into the Hulk. And without the memories of his other self, the Hulk doesn't understand what's going on, or where he is. But what he does recognize, is the voice of the Avengers, who are talking beneath the living rock. Since he considers them his enemies, he decides to head underground and destroy them. So just as Giant Man is telling Thor about the tiny spot that can safely destroy the living rock, the Hulk attacks. Knowing their focus needs to be on the living rock, Thor orders his teammates to rush up to the surface and deal with it, while he holds back the Hulk. So they do, and he goes to battle the Green Goliath. But just as he's about to land the first blow, the Witch Doctor sneaks up behind him, and blasts him with a radioactive rod. Strangely, its radiation triggers one of Thor's transformations back into Dr. Don Blake. While you'd think this would leave him vulnerable to another attack, the Witch Doctor actually flees in terror. He thinks that the transformation was done on purpose, and that anyone who can magically change into another being is far more powerful than him. But that still leaves the Hulk, who can easily destroy Dr. Blake. But the frail physician doesn't actually have to worry about the Hulk, for when the Witch Doctor blasted Thor, he caused a portion of the cave to collapse, and separated the hero from everyone else. But while Dr. Blake would normally just stamp his hammer to transform back into Thor, the blasts left him too weak to even raise his arm. Thus his teammates will need to come up with a way to destroy the living rock without him, and also deal with the Hulk. Thinking about this, the Avengers realize that they can do both at the same time, as they can use the Hulk, who's just as strong as Thor, to safely destroy the living rock. So they lure the green behemoth onto the rock, and goad him into striking its one vulnerable spot. Only moments later, the whole thing implodes. And while a powerful shockwave's released, it's far weaker than if the rock had exploded. So with the threat of the living rock gone, Dr. Blake, who's heard its implosion from underground, summons the last of his strength, and transforms into Thor to deal with the lava men. He simply tells them to leave, and to never menace the surface again. For if they do, the Avengers will be there to defend it, at all costs. Heeding this warning, the lava men gather themselves up, and leave. Meanwhile, back on the surface, the Avengers are recovering from the living rock's implosion. But surprisingly, except for being knocked to the ground, none of them, not even Rick Jones, were actually harmed by it. But this isn't a total win for them, as like in the previous two issues, the Hulk has escaped. But unlike those two issues, he hasn't gone very far. In fact, he's not even the Hulk anymore. For some reason he's transformed back into Bruce Banner, and is lying dazed in the middle of a field. But thankfully, Betty Ross, who as previously mentioned is the daughter of General Ross, has just found him. It seems that she was the only one who even noticed that he was missing, as everyone else was too busy celebrating the Avengers' triumph. Regardless, seeing that Bruce is wearing tattered clothes, and is lying in the middle of a random field, she asks him if he was attacked by the Hulk. He tells her that he was. So she helps him into her Jeep, and the two presumably return to the base, where he can get some rest. The issue subsequently ends as we shift back to the Avengers, who've been reunited with Thor, and are about to head back to New York in their helicopter. But just before takeoff, they receive a radio distress call, alerting them to a new emergency. While that concludes our story for today, Marvel has appended 2 letter pages at the end of this issue. For those unaware, letter pages were once hallmarks of the comics industry in an age before the internet. They gave Marvel an opportunity to respond to the praise, criticism, and suggestions they'd received about their stories. All of the letters presented in this issue were sent by mail to Marvel almost 60 years ago, and cover up to Avengers 3. While I won't be reading the letter pages aloud, please take a moment to look and see what readers of the time thought of this series. It's certainly an interesting experience, all of these years later. And with that, we've concluded Avengers 5, and another episode of the Classic Comic Archive. But as always, I would like to offer a brief review of this issue. Overall, I thought that this was a fairly solid story. It didn't blow me away, but I liked that the stakes were high, the action was exciting, and that the Avengers really showed just how well they worked together as a team. My only real complaint is that the Hulk was underutilized. He pretty much only showed up in the beginning and the end of the issue, when I think he could have also had a role in the middle. But in any case, let me know what you thought of this issue and the video, and feel free to suggest other classic comics for me to cover. Thanks for watching.